Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Double 18 Podcast. I'm your host, Steven Nagishi. It's Monday, and it is absolutely stunning for me, having to deal with a blowout loss from the Chicago Bears to the Detroit Lions last week. And thankfully, I'm off today, last day on my vacation. So I'm just going to try and find a way to get my shit together and talk football. And today we have a very loaded live stream schedule. In case you haven't seen my X just yet, we have Anthony Russo, who is coming on very, very shortly, draft analyst. And then somebody who I've had in the past, Adam Rank from the NFL Network. Yes, that Adam Rank. He is going to be coming on with us at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, where he resides. So that will be his time. Thanking Adam once again for making a busy, taking time out of his busy schedule with the father duties as well as his work with the NFL Network. And then 8:30 tonight Eastern, Bill Sparks, another NFL draft expert, college football expert as well. We're going to be talking a lot about the college football and the upcoming NFL draft schedule. And if you're a Bears fan like me, that's something I'm probably going to have to start thinking a little bit further ahead, a lot earlier than I would like to, just to keep my sanity in place. But now, without further ado, I'm very honored to have this guest on. We're very, very excited to welcome Mr. Anthony Russo from Long Island, noted Jets fan and also NFL draft expert. Anthony, thank you very much for joining me. Good afternoon, and thanks for doing this on this Monday afternoon. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. I'm glad we were able to get the schedules to link up. Happy to be here. Happy to talk NFL draft always.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for joining us on this, small show. But myself and Ken Fang from Awful Announcing, we've started this show almost 5 years ago to this date, and we're very, very excited to always bringing a new guest that a lot of people are not really familiar with, only the mainstreamers. But we also wanted to give, small, content creators their dues and opportunities, and we're very, very happy to have you on. And all right, let's get out of the way and start talking football. Week 2 of the NFL pretty much concluded. We have a couple of Monday night football games on schedule already so far tonight. The Bucks and the Houston Texans on the main channel, and then the Chargers and the Raiders on 10:30 Eastern kickoff tonight. You're a Jets fan. I'm a Bears fan, and we have a lot to talk about. We have several things in common. We hired 2 hot assistant coaches from the Detroit Lions organizations. We're 0-2 as we speak right now. Let's start with the Jets. Your team, 0-2 start, really gave the Pittsburgh Steelers a run for their money. They led several times during the game, unfortunately, and more so, ironically, Aaron Rodgers led the team to a comeback win. And then yesterday, it was against the arch rival, the Buffalo Bills. Just completely took it to the Jets yesterday. What is your opinion so far on the New York Jets so far under Aaron Glenn? What's the biggest change you've seen so far that makes you feel optimistic, even with the 0-2 start?
After yesterday, it's a little tough to find optimism. No, look, I think, I can't speak for all Jets fans, but for myself, and I think a good chunk of them at least, this team was never expected to be like a deep playoff contender, right? Like, we were coming into this season, new coach, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback in Justin Fields. There's talent on both sides of the ball, but I don't think this roster would have ever been considered one of the elite rosters even before the season started. So, the hope, I think, for this season was to show that they could be competitive and to show that, the coaching that's being put in place shows signs of success. week one, I think, did that. Even it's a tough way to lose to the Steelers. Obviously, against Aaron Rodgers doesn't help either. But there were a lot of positive takeaways, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. In that game, Justin Fields looked like one of the best 10 quarterbacks of the week, I would say, if not even higher than that. This week was very different. The offense was messy and sloppy, and Justin Fields, I think, literally completed 3 passes before he got injured. It was just a mess. That they couldn't run the ball effectively on the Bills. It was basically Garrett Wilson was the only person catching passes consistently. And that was, sort of a fear for this team, was who was going to be a playmaker outside of Garrett Wilson. I think the hope was the run game would carry the team, but when that failed, there's no one else to turn to. So I'm still not totally out on the season, and I'm not totally, you can't be out on a new coach after 2 games. But I do, I am a little concerned now. And whereas after week 1, I was more optimistic to the idea of potentially Justin Fields being somebody to build the team around. Now I'm kind of back to where I was prior to that, which is, I think next year, 2026 draft, we ought to be looking for a real quarterback of the future.
Well, you're an NFL draft expert, and we'll get into the conversation in just a moment. As a Bears fan, I was kind of given a false hope after week 1, where the Bears were outplaying the Vikings, but then in the fourth quarter, everything just completely collapsed. And if you look at the Vikings and the way they played against the Atlanta Falcons last night on Sunday Night Football, it was just completely just shocking how poor J.J. McCarthy played. And, McCarthy played poorly the entire, well, at least maybe, through 3 quarters. And then he took over in the fourth quarter to help, Vikings to a victory, although it probably has more to do with the Bears shooting themselves in the foot with bad penalties and missed field goals, et cetera, et cetera. And I kind of feel, after what I witnessed, a total beatdown against the Detroit Lions. Ben Johnson's homecoming was just a complete annihilation. It was a well-deserved beating. When you look at the Bears and how they played the first 2 weeks yesterday, obviously people always likes to poke fun on Caleb Williams because obviously there hasn't been any quarterback in Chicago who has actually became a legitimate starters. You mentioned Justin Fields. He was discarded after 3 years in Chicago. He went to Pittsburgh, and then now he's on the Jets. Before that, Mitch Trubisky, and then and so forth. As an NFL draft expert, Anthony, what were your expectations on Caleb Williams, and how has he looked so far in his first 2 games? Because at least yesterday, I thought he played decent, and he was, at least in my opinion, he was the least of the problems outside of the interception that he severely maybe should not have, or at least throw it more towards out of bounds. What are your thoughts on Caleb Williams coming out and how he's looked under Ben Johnson through first 2 games?
Yeah, so I think I was like a lot of people that felt that in terms of just pure combination of arm talent, ability to make throws outside the pocket, and just natural athleticism, it was rare, the combination that he brought to the table. There's a reason he won the Heisman. He was one of the most exceptional off-script playmakers that you would see in college football. Really took Lincoln Riley's offense to really high heights, despite the fact that he didn't really have the greatest supporting cast at USC. Coming into the league, the hope, I think, was he could replicate that skill, but also could develop as just a pure pocket passer. And it feels like, and I don't, I'm not watching as many Bears games as you are, but from what I've seen these first couple weeks, it feels like the problem remains that he's a better passer when he's, moving outside the pocket and throwing downfield versus, just standing in the pocket, set on his 2 feet and forced to just make throws. Like he's still, there were several throws in that Minnesota game that he just sailed them. He just missed.
He did.
They're throws that not even just Caleb, like any NFL starter would be expected to make, and he just didn't make them. And then, for particularly someone who was a first overall former Heisman Trophy winner, you're a little like, what the hell? I do think coaching matters, and I do not think that the coaching that Caleb had in his rookie season was, to say the least, beneficial to him overall. I do think Ben Johnson is an upgrade in that way, not even just, from an X's and O's standpoint, but also just somebody who we've seen with a track record of developing and getting the most out of the quarterback position. Obviously what he did with Jared Goff in Detroit. So I think 2 weeks is not enough time to decide that, Caleb's not the answer. We got to throw him away. I do agree with you that there are other issues with the Bears. Rome Odunze has looked great these first couple games, which is, I was very high on Rome Odunze when he was coming out as well. It feels like to me that that Ben Johnson wants to build his offense the way he wants to build it. That's why he drafted Luther Burden. That's why he drafted Colston Loveland. He has a vision, and it's not going to be implemented after 2 weeks, especially when there's still clearly also deficiencies on the defensive side of the ball.
That's a big problem, yes.
They're still struggling to stop the run. They are still struggling, across the board. I think I saw Jalen Johnson now is out as well. So that's an issue. So, trying to rebuild an offense while also dealing with a problematic defense is not a good combo, especially in a division with 3 teams that are viable playoff teams. So, it's for Bears fans. I would express patience. It's literally, it's been 1 year and 2 games of Caleb Williams, and he's already had 2 head coaches. There are issues that I would be worried about, but I'm still willing to. I'd still be willing to give it time.
Mm-hmm. If you include Thomas Brown, the interim coach, that makes it a little, 3. But
True.
Obviously, nobody is counting much about the interim coaches. But again, I said earlier, he was the least of the problems. Okay, so it takes patience. Obviously, Ben certainly has way of wanting to play, and it will definitely going to take time. And whether it's fair or not, we'll find out. Again, when Dan Campbell took over, I remember I was in Detroit at the time for work. People mocked him for how he talked on in front of a microphone, and his coffee addictions were more of a talk. People made him look like a caveman, and made fun of him constantly. The team was 3-13 and won his first year. The second year they started off 1-6, and they were ready to run him out of town. Trust me. But then Ben Johnson was the OC. Things finally took off. They finished 9-8, knocked Aaron Rodgers out of the playoffs. Of course, also that was the last game with the Packers too. And from that point on, everything has been a smooth sailing. And I do believe that it's a similar trajectory with the Chicago Bears, because a lot of players, and maybe you could look at it from your own eyes as well, a lot of the players that the Bears have acquired under Ryan Poles have not gotten the job done. Montez Sweat, Javon Dexter, excuse me, on the D line has not been effective at all as a pass rusher. The linebackers, Tremaine Edmonds, he makes almost $20 million, but he's barely making any plays on the defense at all. Tyreek Stevenson has been abysmal ever since that Washington Hail Mary game, and looks like he's totally cooked right now. Yeah, you being a Jets fan and I'm being a Bears fan, objectively, we know we're all used to losing, unfortunately. So I know patience is a virtue, and in this day and age, we don't have a lot of patience available. So when you look at the Bears roster overall, and the GM Ryan Poles' inability to put together a decent roster, Anthony, and you being a Jets fan, you saw a lot of the GMs that went through this: John Ezek, Mike McCagan, John Douglas, who was also let go in the last cycle as well. When you look at the roster constructions, how bad is it that, from your outside perspective, do you see that the Bears roster looks like, whether it's on offense and then also on the defensive side, not just from a draft perspective, but also from the free agency and all the acquisitions that they've made so far?
Well, look, I thought coming into the year, I loved what they did, on offense. I thought they did what they had to do. Offensive line was the very clear issue last year. And they went out and they did exactly what you would want. They attacked offensive line. They brought in Drew Dahlman. They brought in Thuney. They did what they needed to do. And then I thought, Braxton Jones was is not the perfect left tackle, but I thought starting him was a reasonable choice. And I mentioned earlier, like they drafted Colston Loveland, they drafted Luther Burden. They already had DJ Moore. So I think on paper, I think you could have had very high hopes for this offense. I think it is just coming down to Ben Johnson is trying to implement his schemes and his style of play, and Caleb Williams, already having a year doing a completely different style, now has to learn to adapt, and they've got to try to find that balance between each other. At the end of the day, you can sign a great offensive line, and you could sign a great receiving core, but if the quarterback isn't up to snuff, then it doesn't really matter. So I think that's what it boils down to. And then in terms of the defense, you talked about it. I think they've swung and missed just too much, and it's showing now. I think the secondary was and still is, a talented group. I mentioned like the Jalen Johnson injury, but I think the front seven particularly felt like the problem last year. And, the downside of drafting two big time playmakers is you're not drafting defense. So, I would expect this offseason, defense is probably going to be higher on the priority list, whether that is through the draft or if they try another free agency. Ryan Poles getting more money to spend on free agents wouldn't make me feel great.
That's been a talk of the Chicago radio today, fair or not, because yesterday's blowout loss was not a good reflection on Ryan Poles because of the players that he has acquired. They all, I don't want to say quit the word easily, but certainly I think we're learning a lot about, as a Jets fan, when a new regime takes over from previous regimes, you learn a lot about the players who you inherited, about whether they have the mental makeup to handle losing, like your team and my team went through yesterday in a different fashion, but it was still, unfortunately, not a competitive game, and you start to I don't want to say weed out bad characters, but that's, I think, what Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson are kind of using this year as a not necessarily a throw in, year, but this is an opportunity for, to mold the team to their image. And you have to kind of find who fits the mold and who doesn't. So I totally understand, and I think a lot of Bears fans, myself included, we're a little bit of getting antsy, and unfortunately, we're kind of paying the price for the previous regime's players in that sense. My guest today today is Anthony Russo, NFL draft expert. Follow him on Twitter there at Anthony_Russo97. So one question regarding the Jets, there were a couple of them. I think there's a good plethora of running backs that you guys have on this roster. Braylon Allen from Wisconsin versus Breece Hall. Breece Hall, I believe, is entering his free agency, if I'm not mistaken, this year.
Yep.
Okay, and if God forbid, if the Bears decide, you know what, our running game sucks, and we need to do something about it, and we need to make a phone call. And I do believe that throughout off season, before the season started, Breece Hall's name was kind of like being thrown around by the Bears fans about his acquisitions, even though he's a free agent. If you're Darren Mogi, the Jets GM, and I'm let's say Ryan Poles, and I'm making a phone call for one of your running backs. Does Breece Hall for third round pick make sense from a Jets perspective? And do you think that Breece Hall will be a good pickup for the Bears to get their running game going?
So yeah, I would say it makes sense. The issue with Breece, because I think when Breece is healthy, he is at least top 10 running back in the NFL, if not, in the top 5 conversation. That said, health has been an issue. And that was kind of why Braylon Allen was brought in to sort of be the, big physical short yard guy, and Breece Hall could be more of the, explosive home run threat receiving option kind of guy. And I think overall it's worked when the offensive line has held up their end of the bargain. But that said, like you alluded to, this is a contract year. The Jets are not at all a playoff contender at this point, unless we see a big turnaround. So I think trading him would absolutely make sense, especially we've heard Aaron Glenn say, he wants more of a committee style running back room as opposed to having any kind of true bell cow. So, we saw a very talented running back class this year. I was kind of hoping we would dip our toe in there, but we didn't. But, the Braylon Allen, you can find a partner with Braylon Allen through the draft or through free agency, that's very doable. So moving Breece, and I think, he's not going to fetch crazy trade value. I don't think just because you are, as talented as he is, that injury risk is still there. He's had multiple seasons now where he's been held back by injuries of some kind. So, and he's going to obviously want to get paid too. So that will also lower his value. I think a third is a reasonable offer.
Even a fourth round.
I would say maybe a third and a fifth, or a third and a sixth, maybe add on one more pick. But yeah, if the Jets, and listen, if the Bears want to make that move, I definitely think he can fill a similar role to what Jahmyr Gibbs was in for Ben Johnson in Detroit. I absolutely think there's a similar-esque skill set. I think Gibbs is a little more just purely fast and explosive. But they can certainly do similar things, in the passing game, and in terms of running more of those wider zone run concepts and being able to find a crease and break it. So, it depends how they feel about DeAndre Swift. He actually played, I think, pretty well yesterday, whereas the Minnesota game, he struggled a bit. Yeah. I was a big fan of Kyle Monangai coming out. I think he's a nice piece to have in that running back room as well. So, I don't know if it would make a huge ton of sense, because, again, you got to pay him. So I don't know if it makes all the sense for the Bears, but if they want that upgrade and they still want to give Caleb a chance to get this team to the playoffs, it could be. I think it's a good fit from a scheme perspective.
All right, let's move on to your neck of the woods. Obviously, college football. Week 3 is in the books, and this was something that me and Ken Fang from Awful Announcing last night we discussed in details, but we wanted to kind of get more in detailed analysis from your perspective. Obviously, the talk in college football is just how Arch Manning has continued to look bad through 3 games. Ohio State game, that's understandable. You're talking about a team that lost in the national championships, and throughout the game, it's understandable about making giving Arch a pass on the Ohio State game, but the last 2 games he still has looked pretty bad when it comes to his decision making or his arm strength. A lot has been made about whether he is injured or whether Steve Sarkisian and his staff made some unnecessary changes in his delivery or his arm. What do you think of Arch Manning's performance so far? And is this salvageable in your opinion, or do you feel like Sark has no choice but to even consider making changes at the quarterback at some point?
So I'll say 2 things. One, for when I did my summer scouting over the summer, I did not grade Arch Manning. And the reason I didn't grade Arch Manning was because he only had 2 starts and like half a couple other games on his resume. And for me, that was not enough of a sample size to fairly to Arch to evaluate him as a potential NFL player. I wanted to see what he did as a starter, taking over now it's his team. I wanted to see what he would do with this Texas roster and this offense and how he would deliver. And this is my personal opinion, and I'm not a doctor. I'm not any sort of medically qualified individual, but from what I see, I think he's injured. I think there is some kind of shoulder or elbow issue that is not being publicly discussed, and I'm not going to speculate, and I'm not going to throw around conspiracy theories. But I looking at him play football from the Ohio State game all the way through to this past weekend when they played UTEP, he does not look like he is throwing the same way, and he looks visibly uncomfortable. The way that he is throwing the football, he is not putting any torque on his right shoulder. He's doing a lot of side arm, a lot of just like, trying to sort of
notice that in the Ohio State game too. He was like throwing sideways and it's hitting the ball like it's like a baseball pitcher hitting the the plate or something.
Yes, and that, listen, that is how some quarterbacks throw. John Mateer, as a great example, he throws like that. He has a baseball background, and that's how he throws the football. Arch did not throw like that last year in the 2 starts and whatever game he played. He did not throw like that. He is throwing visibly different, and there is videos I have shared and other very credible individuals, not like these aggregator web people. They're showing him like grimacing and visibly like, again, just not looking comfortable. And I again, I want to make it clear, I have no like insider info. I'm not reporting anything, but just my evaluation, my eyes tell me he is hurt in some capacity. And if that's the case, I have a really hard time being okay with playing him, especially in these cupcake, again, like the UTEPs of the world. I think they play Sam Houston State, if I'm not mistaken, before they then, begin SEC conference play. So like, I have a really hard time. And I know like, again, it's Arch's team. He's the guy we've built to this moment where he's going to take over for Quinn Ewers, and this is this is sort of the coronation, and I think that so this is one of the posts that I put. Like, it's not being discussed, and Steve Sarkisian came out and was like, there is no injury. Those are just rumors that, I forget, like, he made some kind of joke about it too. But like, it doesn't look right. And if it's not an injury, and if it is just a change in mechanics or a change in throwing motion or whatever, why? Like, why is that all of a sudden something we're doing? Like, Steve Sarkisian is a smart coach. He knows quarterbacks. He knows offenses. He understands how to develop players on offense. Why would we just change everything about Arch's throwing motion and make his mechanics look horrifically bad? Like, if he's not hurt. So I have a hard time believing that it's not a medical thing. And if it is a medical thing, I would put him on the bench at least, for the next game, figure out if we can get him 100%, get him right as the season goes on. Because you got to remember too, like, Arch has 2 years of eligibility left. He's not a senior. He's not guaranteed to come out this year. If anything, it seems like he has no intention of coming out this year. And I don't think the Manning family, the Manning collective, is going to let him come out this year. So if that's the case, why are we like forcing this issue? Sarkisian's not fighting for his job. It's not like it just, there's a lot of question marks about what the approach is to Arch Manning right now. And I if I'm a Texas fan and I'm a Manning fan, and I want him to be great. I want him to live up to all this hype that was unfairly thrown on him. Yeah. But there's serious question marks that we've seen through this whole season so far.
So obviously, Arch will probably not likely come out this year in next year's draft, 2026. Obviously, unlike other players, he's not hurting for money. Obviously, with the NIL, he certainly gets his share of cool endorsements. So that's not a problem. Talking about QB1 in the upcoming NFL draft, and Cade Klubnik was a consensus favorite. Looks like he has kind of crashed his stock, unfortunately, with a 1-2 start with Clemson. Garrett Nussmeier looks to be the guy in the driver's seat right now, but he doesn't look like he's kind of like a franchise type quarterback. He's also slightly older next year. He's going to be 24 when he enters the NFL league right now. Is Garrett Nussmeier still your number one QB coming into next year's draft, or is John Mateer or somebody else kind of climbing up in the your ranks so far?
Yeah, so coming into the year, I had Klubnik at 1. That has changed. As you said, Klubnik has looked more like the 2023 version of himself than the second half of 2024 version of himself that I, coming into the year, was kind of hoping we would see more of. He looks skittish. He looks uncomfortable under pressure. He is, not putting the ball where it needs to be. His ball placement is not at the level that it was, again, toward the second half of last year. And I do not. I think there are issues with the Clemson offense that are not Cade Klubnik related. I hate some of the play calling I've seen. I think their lack of a run game is hurting. I think the offensive line, there's several injuries on the offensive side of the ball. So I do think Klubnik is getting a little too much of the blame. But that said, he's absolutely not played up to the level that I and many other people expected him to. Nussmeier, I think Nussmeier has played. Let me say this. I think Nussmeier has shown the most NFL qualities and traits and skills in the first 3 weeks of the season. And he's done it against the best competition compared to everybody else. He's dealt with a Clemson defense that, it hasn't lived up to the hype, but it still is a very talented group. He's now done it to Florida. It wasn't, and I don't think he was particularly, elite in either of those games, but did what he needed to do. The problem is a lot of the quarterbacks that are playing really well are doing it against pretty bad teams. Penn State's Drew Aller hasn't really played anyone worth talking about. Indiana's Fernando Mendoza hasn't really played anyone worth talking about. I think Lenora Sellers has also kind of been a little meh, this year.
In the Vanderbilt game, right? I believe.
Yeah, like in the Vanderbilt game. I mean, he got hurt, obviously, but even before that, he wasn't doing anything that particularly special. And he wasn't. I don't think he was that particularly special in the Virginia Tech game either. So, all these guys that we kind of hoped for to take that step haven't really. Nussmeier again is probably the one that's closest to doing that. But if you're asking me, if I had the number 1 overall pick in the draft and I needed a quarterback, who am I taking? I guess it's Nussmeier, but I'm not super. It's Nussmeier or Sellers probably, but I'm not running to the podium to do it. I still see issues, either issues that I saw already coming into the year, or or just the lack of development that I wanted to see. And again, we're only 3 weeks into the season. There's plenty of time for these guys to deliver on what we hoped for them. But at this moment, I'm not super excited about anybody.
And the next year's QB class, correct?
Yeah, in 2026. Yeah. And that's that's the other part of it too, is there's, you mentioned Arch doesn't have to come out. Lenora Sellers doesn't have to come out. Fernando Mendoza doesn't have to come out. There's several guys that can decide, I'm going to do one more year. and we could do.
Money is good money too. So exactly.
So yeah.
What about Carson Beck and Sam Levitt? Do any of those two guys interest you, or do you still want to see more out of those two guys?
So Carson Beck is an interesting one, because Carson Beck was my QB1 in summer scouting in 2024 last year,
when he was still with Georgia. Yeah.
When he was with Georgia, correct. And that obviously did not pan out. And then he obviously decided to come back and move on to Miami. And he certainly looks better than he did at Georgia. I think supporting cast is a big part of that as well. But I'm not ready to say we were wrong and he actually is a first round pick. I still find some of the accuracy issues are there. Some of his pocket presence issues are still there. So I'm not ready to say yep, he's right back in the first round conversation. And Sam Levitt is just Levitt's another one that I think should stay in school and not declare for this draft. He's very much like how you would play quarterback in Madden. He is a video game player, and with that means the fun, the highlight plays are awesome, and he and Jordan Tyson have a super awesome connection. They make big plays. There was one touchdown that he threw. I forget who they played this past week, but he's going out to his left and he makes a jump pass, and then Jordan Tyson catches it and then leaps over a defender and scores the touchdown. It's the most, again, Madden play you'll ever see. But there's a recklessness and a the no yes feeling is a little too much for me with him. So I would expect him to not declare necessarily this year, and he's only a redshirt sophomore, so he's in no hurry to get to the NFL. And I think those two guys too just speak to it's so up in the air because nobody has like truly separated themselves. Again, like Nussmeier's played the best, I would say, but it's not by a particularly wide margin. And with this group, you know, when Caleb Williams was going to be a draft pick, you know, going into his final year at USC, we all knew he was a first overall pick. And we all knew Drake May was a top 5 pick in that class too. Like that, no question. You know, Drake May didn't even have a great year, but it didn't matter because we all saw NFL quarterback. This group, there were just so many guys that like, oh, you can see it, you can see the vision, but there's just like one or two key things that hold you back. And so, you know, we need to see some of these guys get over those humps to really sell themselves as like, oh, I can be a first overall pick. Because there are plenty of teams that need a quarterback. There are plenty of teams that will want to be in the quarterback market, but it could be a similar scenario to this past year where the supply just doesn't meet the demand, you know, and we see more of these free agent signings on 1 year or 2 year deals, and you know, guys that maybe rise up on draft day that maybe you wouldn't have thought, but like the Tyler Shucks of the world going 40, and you know, Jackson Dart getting into the first round. So it's a very interesting crop of players to watch develop as the year goes on.
Anthony Russo is my guest, the NFL draft expert. He has a Substack as well, which we will show it to you toward the end of the show in a moment. Let's do some quick look at the top prospects for each positions. We talked about quarterbacks. Give me your top two. Let's start with the top 2 prospects for each positions. Let's start with the running back. Jalen Love of Notre Dame seems to be the consensus. Obviously Bears need a running back, and his name is linked to many of the mock drafts to the Chicago Bears already, although that could change if the Bears continue to lose and may ended up drafting in the top 10. Then we're talking maybe D-line or some defensive players after yesterday's debacle. Who's your top 2 running backs in this year's class?
So I am of the ultra minority that does not have Jeremiah Love in the top 2. I still have some issues with his running style, and you know, if he can truly be a 3 down guy. I felt, you know, week 1 against Miami, very mind-bogglingly, if that's a word, had 10 carries for like 33 yards. And there were, you know, I think there were questions of just like why that was the case. And then this past week against Texas A&M looked better, got more touches, had that big touchdown catch. So, you know, you felt better about it. But for me at this point, I would say Nick Singleton out of Penn State is RB1. I think he has a true 3 down skill set. I think he's the best receiving back in this upcoming class. I think he has great size. He's like 6 foot, 227 pounds. But he's probably going to run like a 4.4 something. So, you know, love the size, speed, athleticism combination that he brings to the table. And then a guy who originally was RB3, now has jumped my original RB2 because Mekhi Hughes just isn't playing for some reason. But Jonah Coleman out of Washington is a big. I shouldn't even say big because he's 5'9", but he's a stocky, heavy running back. He's 5'9", 229. He's a bowling ball kind of running back. You know, he will barrel you down, but also kind of has some like surprisingly good quickness. He's not going to be a burner at 230 pounds or whatever, but you know, he's a fun back to watch, and he's had a pretty big start to the season from a box score perspective. So, you know, he's a fun one to watch for sure. I think Jeremiah Love for me can get into that top 2 conversation if he keeps having more games like last week rather than the week 1 performance. But that said, too, I don't expect this running back class to be as strong, which it's not really a fair comp because I think this past class was like historically pretty great.
Yeah.
So I'm not expecting this class to be that. I think there's going to be a lot of good day 2 and 3 players that, for like a team like the Bears,
Yes.
if they do decide, maybe move on from DeAndre Swift, you can draft, somebody who's a little more explosive and a pure, like, quick fast back to pair with like a Kyle Monangai, who is more of that bigger
Physical runner, yes.
cruising physical runner. Right. I think Monangai and one of these other guys that, you could see rise up. I think that's an interesting combination, and it could be very reminiscent to the Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery pairing that, Ben obviously had in Detroit.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to change the title to from a Bears perspective, because obviously, I don't want to keep you holding on. Receiver, Bears obviously don't need one. Tight end, we could skip that as well. We already invested in Colston Loveland as tight end 1. Offensive line, I think it's still a bit of a question mark. We still don't have an answer at left tackle. Braxton Jones could be replaced or could be benched after week 5 bye. And then you have to probably throw in Theo Benedict, the former free agent out of Canada. Who's your top 2 left tackle prospect for the Bears next year?
So I'll say my top two left tackles right now are Caleb Lamu at Utah, and then Drew Shelton at Penn State. Caleb Lamu in particular, I think, has a chance to be a very special left tackle prospect. For somebody who, at this point, he's only a redshirt sophomore and was a starter, was a starter last year as a redshirt freshman, and just put together some of the best tackle tape that you would see probably ever for a freshman tackle. His technique, his footwork, his ability to snatch and trap was so impressive to watch. And I know Utah is not playing, they're not playing SEC schools, but they're still a Power 4 team. They're still seeing, some pretty decent edge players. So to watch the sort of clinic that Caleb Lamu could put on, again, was just super impressive to watch. And I think for the Bears, I certainly would be an upgrade to a Braxton Jones. And I also think somebody that, like, I talked about before, Ben Johnson wants to sort of build this offense in his image. I wonder, the one knock on Lamu is he doesn't have a ton of just like natural mass and play strength. He's only like 300 pounds. So coming from having Penei Sewell as your left tackle to then going to Lamu would certainly be a downgrade in the power department. But, I do think for, if Johnson wants to do more, again, like sort of these like wider zone concepts and spread the ball out and get to playmakers out in space, I think Lamu is a guy who, he has the athleticism to be able to get out there and get blocks on the second level. So I think Lamu would be a really nice piece to have. And I will say too, like, I was a fan of Ozzie Trapillo coming out, this past year. So I still view him as a potential starter, even though I think he was a healthy scratch, which not the greatest sign in the world. But I thought he was a good player. So, I don't know, but Caleb Lamu was a one that I would, if the Bears, I hate to say it, if the Bears are picking in the top 5 or 10 picks, which might be in the cards based on how they played, Caleb Lamu and if Caleb Lamu declares, I think he's somebody that they absolutely could target and give themselves that true franchise left tackle for, the next decade and a half.
We'll find out, if Ozzy Trapello will eventually get the nod, and then given the shot at the left tackle, which was the case throughout training camp until he hit a rookie wall. Looking at the defense, it looks like it has to be more likely that Bears have to spend their share of capital on the defense. The edge rusher, top two, I've been reading a lot of TJ Parker of Clemson, Calvin Falk of Auburn are being the top two. Are those two guys your top two edge rushers, or do you have anybody else in mind right now?
So my number one edge rusher is actually Ruben Bain out of Miami.
I forgot his name. Sorry about that.
And no, you're good. I'll tell you too. Ruben Bain was my number one player, period, coming into the year. And he has delivered on all that I thought he could be. He's looked like a demon out there. Single-handedly, I shouldn't say single-handedly, but he was whooping Notre Dame in week 1, and he has not slowed down at all in these past couple of games too. So I love him, and the Chicago fans would love Ruben Bain too. Parker's interesting because he was my edge too coming into the year, and Keldrick Falk was 3. So I mean, they were all, they're all right up there. Parker's been a little disappointing this season. He hasn't been as impactful as a pass rusher. In these first couple games, and him and Peter Woods, who the other Clemson defensive lineman that's been getting loads of hype, and I was very high on. Peter Woods was my number 3 player, so I had very high hopes for this Clemson defensive line, and they just haven't really been great. They've been very sloppy and not effective again as pass rushers. And they haven't really played a particularly great offensive line, I don't think, in any of these weeks. So I am a little concerned for them going forward. I would say, Parker's still a first rounder probably for me, but probably not in the top 10 where I had him. Keldrick Falk has looked as advertised as well. I don't think Auburn's, I guess they played Baylor week 1, but Auburn hasn't really played anyone, the way that, like Notre Dame, Miami, that level. So I don't think we've seen Keldrick Falk in the spotlight. We will, obviously he'll get some top SEC teams as the year goes on. Sure. But he's looked great too. He's 6'6", 270, and he just moves like just a freakish athletic specimen. Sort of similar to Shamar Stewart, but where I think Shamar Stewart was, just a pure athlete and freak of nature, Keldrick Falk actually has like the technique to back it up, I think, more than Stewart did. He's not just relying on athleticism and natural power to win. He has some pass rush moves. And he's also just so solid against the run as well. So, Keldrick Falk, I would say right now, Falk is probably past Parker for me. And so I would say Bain and Falk are the top 2. Parker's still hanging on to that 3 spot, but I'm going to need to see a little more from him.
Okay. Now, secondary is suddenly becoming a position of need. Just found out that Jalen Johnson is out indefinitely, re-aggravating his groin injury that he suffered in the offseason. Tyreek Stevenson is basically a non-factor right now and could be benched anytime soon. Give me your top 2 corners right now. I see the name, popular names like Jermod McCoy and Avion Terrell, I believe, from Clemson. Are these your top 2 guys, or do you have somebody else in mind right now?
So Jermod McCoy is my number 1. That's with the caveat that he's dealing with a
ACL, right? I believe.
Yeah, he tore his ACL. So it's expected that he's going to come back at some point. I think I remember like week 9 is what they were gunning for. So I'm gonna hope that he comes back and he plays to the level that he played last year, because his tape last year is great. I think he's pretty clearly corner one if he plays like he did before the ACL injury. For me, corner two is Xavier Scott from nearby Illinois. I love Xavier Scott, and I'm not the only one. I have people that I talk to in the draft world that have him as corner one. But Xavier Scott is so fun to watch. He's so instinctive. He's not the biggest corner in the world. He's like 5'11", 195, but dude's a playmaker. If you watch him against Kansas last season, he basically single-handedly won that game for them.
He really did. Yeah.
Like he almost outscored Kansas by himself, or he might have actually done that. But yeah, Xavier Scott's a super fun football player. And I, some will say, I'm not sure if he could play on the outside because he's not the biggest. I think he can. But you can probably deploy him in different ways. You can put him in the slot. You could even have him line up as sort of like a safety kind of role as well. I just think he's just such a playmaker and such a smart, instinctive defender that you just want him on the team, and you'll figure out where to put him. In terms of Avion Terrell, for people that don't know, he is AJ Terrell's brother, the Falcons corner.
Yes.
But so Avion Terrell was lower for me, and only really the big reason was his verified measurements were 5'11", 180. And I get nervous for a corner that's 180 pounds. There obviously are the smaller corners, but when you're that weight, that concerns me of if you're going to be able to play on the outside in the NFL. That said, he's looked very good this season. He was actually like one of the few shining spots for when Clemson lost to LSU in week 1. And he has played very well this season. So he might be swaying me to be willing to give him that chance. I probably would like him to weigh a little bit more when we get to like the combine and stuff. But he's a physical, for a guy who is 180, he's super physical, not afraid to hit people like his brother. But he can make plays on the ball. He can go stride for stride with receivers. So it's a pretty good corner group, I would say. If Jermon McCoy, unwillingly, but if he's not healthy and doesn't look like the player he was, I have a hard time seeing a corner go in like the top 10. Jermon McCoy probably has the best chance to do that if he even does that. But it's a good group. I definitely think the Bears could get some good value probably on like day 2 in the secondary, because there's quite a few good corners, I think, in this group.
Then finally, the safety is also a bit of a question mark. Kevin Byard III is a free agent. Jaquan Brisker has had multiple concussions and is a free agent at the end of the year. Obviously, Caleb Downs is probably consensus top 5 in most people's draft board, regardless of the positions. Caleb Downs and Dylan Thieneman, who transferred to Oregon from Purdue. Kamari Ramsey looked good against Purdue this week. Are those the top 2-3 safeties that you have on your board as well?
Yeah, I think Downs and Thieneman are the two. Like, all right, for me, they're basically like, it's not quite 1A, 1B, but it's kind of like 1A, 1C, if that makes sense. Like Caleb Downs is just on another. We are not going to see many safety prospects have just the complete package that he has. It's very like Kyle Hamilton-esque what he brings to the table in terms of just football IQ, physicality, the ability to play against the run, the athleticism to still be effective in coverage. He's not an elite, just pure like center fielder kind of safety, but it's enough to where, in like a cover 2 look, you'd feel okay with him taking up half the field. And I think, again, he's just so smart that he makes up for not even being an elite athlete. And that's not even me saying he's a bad athlete by any means, but he's a hell of a football player. Kyle Hamilton not going top 10 was a mistake, as we've now learned. I hope teams don't make that mistake again with Caleb Downs. He deserves to be a top 10 pick. And for me, I love Thieneman. I think whereas Downs isn't that pure center fielder, Thieneman very much is that. You can put him single high and feel pretty good about whatever he needs to do, whether that is, be in coverage and go make a play on the ball, or come downhill and just chase down a running back or a receiver on a screen or whatever. He is a fast, athletic, but he's still got good size. And he's been looking pretty good for Oregon so far. They haven't really, they're another team that hasn't really played anybody, really worth talking about. Sorry if you're a Northwestern fan. But it's when they start to play, like, I think they play Penn State in 2 weeks, they'll get some more Big Ten competition. So, I want to see if Thieneman can handle those kinds of teams, but I have no reason to believe he can't. He's a very good football player. So, two safeties that I would actually feel pretty good about taking, at least in the first round. I think Caleb Downs is worthy of a top 10 pick.
Now, before we let you go, you have a Substack for your work. I know we were discussing a little bit earlier before we went on air. Kind of give us like your background and how you ended up starting your own Substack for draft, and how the business itself is going so far for you.
Yeah. So I if you follow me on X, you'll know that I tweet a lot. It's mostly draft related, but sometimes I, spout off a little bit. So I kind of wanted a place where, like, I have some ideas for, like, certain kinds of content that I want to see on the NFL draft. So, I decided, why not make a Substack and put it there? So, you'll find I do NFL draft, like, news roundups every Friday. So I find, like, the biggest headlines of the week that I think will have some kind of impact on the draft as a whole, or a player's individual draft stock, or whatever. And I kind of give a summary and a thought or two about that. And then every Sunday I do what I call the Sunday morning quarterback, because it's basically like quick recaps of what went right and what went wrong in the big college games from the previous day. And then I also like to pull a prospect from each game that I think, deserves more attention, or is someone that I haven't even watched yet, but I think, I want to go back and watch. And then I do some other Thursdays, usually like my miscellaneous day, where I've done, Dallas Cowboys rebuild. I've done a sort of breakdown of how I think Big Noon Kickoff should change its show format. This coming week, I think I'm going to do a sort of college football coaching carousel predictions kind of thing. So there's a little flavor for everybody, if you will. And every post I've made up to this point is in the free, everyone can read it section. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly I want to charge people to read, because I'm the guy that complains when ESPN puts a paywall on certain stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, listen, if you go to my Substack and subscribe, I whether you decide to pay or not, I'd greatly appreciate it. But yeah, it's just, some fun football related content that I try to cater to, whether you're an NFL fan or just a college fan or just an NFL draft fan, something for everybody.
You could subscribe to Anthony's Substack on the address that you see below our screen right there, anthonyrusso97.substack.com. Anthony, thank you very much for doing this this afternoon. I look forward to having you on again, maybe in a couple of weeks, October or November, to have a little more detailed discussion regarding college football and the draft prospects, and maybe hopefully the Bears are much better than they have shown the first 2 weeks. But if nothing else, maybe we could have a more detailed conversations about fixing the Chicago Bears through the draft in 2026. Have a wonderful day, and look forward to keeping in touch with you, and hope to have you on again in the not too distant future.
Yeah, for sure. Would love to come on. Hopefully the next time I do, both of our teams have a win. So
absolutely. At least a win or two would be a great start to.
That's all I want.
That's all I want. That's all I want. I want to have a great, meaningful Sunday for 3 hours that I don't feel like it's a waste of time. So Thank you for your time, and hope to have you on again soon. Take care, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.